Greetings and welcome to my new Earth Star Inner Academy website. If you aren't already on the website right now, I invite you to come and take a look at the Nessia website, newearthstar.org. My spiritual journey began at birth. It always does, doesn't it, for every one of us. But at 4 months old, I pointed to the heavens from my mother's arms at night and said, "Star." That, I think, was for my mother, her first inkling of what was to come. It was a long period of time that I interacted with the beings in a very subtle level through my childhood. And I say the beings. I really mean my spiritual family, my kindred, and the kindred of the earth. At the age of 4 or 5 in Arkansas, I began to be taken into a beautiful desert mountain, and there are no desert mountains in Arkansas. And this was in about 1954. So we didn't have a television and rarely went to movies. This was something that was a very beautiful experience. It wasn't, I say taken, I shouldn't even say that. I was summoned, and I came of my own free will. It was an astral projection, I do believe, as I was floating through the sky and saw this beautiful desert mountain, and then suddenly I was inside it. And the beings that were there were human-like, tall, elegant. As I recall, the ones that were talking to me were male in white jumpsuits, very closely fitted suits that were white, almost shining. They were kind, they were gentle, and yet I recognized them in my soul. And they spoke to me as if I were one of them and not a child, and I understood them perfectly. They showed me things. They showed me these tall, white boxes, not boxes, almost rectangles, and they had lights on them. They were computer towers, of course. But again, this was 1954 in the Ozarks. And when I returned from this visit, which was probably one of many, but I remember only that one, I told my mother about it, and she did not think it was imagination or even particularly a dream. I don't think she had the language to call it astral projection at that time, but she took it on face value. And I drew a picture for her. I drew several pictures, but some of them were not too understandable what I explained they were. I was trying to talk about them like a mountain with the measles, but what I was actually seeing was acupoints in a mountain, you see. But one was very clear, and I called it a clock controlled by the mind. And I still have that drawing. So these drawings she saved, which were on napkins, and she typed underneath them what I said that they were. So my life continued, and a lot of interesting things happened, but I did not feel very connected to going to school. In fact, it really was a difficult process for me. I didn't have trouble learning, and I didn't have trouble getting along with other children or teachers or anything like that. I just felt I was in a false environment for myself. It was totally contradictory to my inner feelings. So in my in high school, the year before graduation, that would in those days have been called the junior year in high school. They have different terms now. I got out of the car and went to the study hall door, put my hand on it to go inside the school building into the study hall area, which was actually the cafeteria. And as I put my hand on the door, there was a transmission, and it came into my mind. It wasn't a voice, but it was very specific words, like one thinks in words. And I knew it wasn't coming from me. And it said very calmly, this was a very calm transmission, even though the words were not something that would ordinarily bring calmness to one's soul. The words were, Christine, my name meant, if you go one more day, it will be dangerous. That was all. Now, it didn't frighten me. I just simply turned around, came back to the car, because my mother always waited for me to go in, not because she didn't think I would, but as moral support. It was so difficult for me. And I told her, she said, what's wrong? And I told her what I heard or received. She looked at me very deeply for about 3 seconds and then said, let's go home. And I never went back, not to school. So, I did, the principal wanted to talk to me and tried to convince me to not do that, and I agreed, so I went and talked to him, but no, I was not buying it. I was not going back, so I never went back to the actual school. And right after that, I began receiving the connections, and it began with my mother's suggestion that I write a short story, enter a short story contest for 17 magazine, because I was kind of languishing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go back to school, but what would I do, I didn't seem to fit in anywhere. So she was just giving me that as a little project. She said, you like to write poetry. Why not, enter this contest? So I sat at my typewriter, and I started typing. Now, it wasn't automatic writing, but it was coming to me just like I knew it. And I wrote about 5 or 6 pages and took it to my mother, and she read it, and she said to me, I don't think this is for 17 magazine. What it was about was an ancient people in Canada who had migrated from somewhere in the Pacific Ocean at the time of the gray moon, when something had happened cataclysmic and the sky was filled with gray and the moon looked gray through it, And it was quite something, this 5 pages. So one thing led to another, and I completed the book. And Under the Gray Moon and its sequel, Daughters of the Gray Moon. These are manuscripts. They've never been published. This was in the early 1970s, 71, something like that. Actually, probably sooner, 67, 68, 69. It's kind of difficult in this, way in the future like this to remember the exact years. But it was, I started it when I was 17. So it would have been in the late 60s. And from there, we came to realize through a series of events, which I won't go into here, that I was tapping into the Akasha. That word was new to us, but we did some research and we realized that's what it was. When I say research, of course, there was no internet then. So I said to myself, well, I've always loved science, although I really hadn't read that much about it. I just had a feeling for science. I thought I'd like to ask this Akasha something scientific, like, something, minor, like how the universe was created. So I went into that. I went into a lot of things. And these sciences became a manuscript I called Universe 1. In fact, that was the name that was given to me. And so at this time also, when I had Universe 1 completed, my mother and I were watching television one night. This was around 72, 73, 74, somewhere in there. And we saw an interview with the then astronaut Edgar Mitchell just before he was going to go on the moon ride. And he was one of the astronauts selected for the trip to the moon to put his feet upon the surface of that other world. And he was talking about how when he returned, he was going to retire from NASA and work to establish an institute for parapsychology. Well, in those days, that was the closest just about to anybody talking about anything mystical, you know. So my mother said, why don't we write to him and send him your science? And so we did. And he didn't receive it until he was back from the moon and out of quarantine. And at that point, he told us later that he was not going to touch any of the millions of packages, or at least thousands, perhaps not millions, that he received, letters, packages, things from people. You know, it was a big deal in those days. Astronauts were, and he was on the moon, you know. So he got fan mail. And he wasn't really going to open anything. He was just going to let his secretary do that, unless it was a letter from someone, you know, whom he knew and was going to respond to personally. But he said his hand was drawn, literally compelled, to my package. And he opened it. He read it, and he called. And my mother answered, so they had the conversation first. And from that, he invited me and my mother to come to Houston, where he still was at the time, to discuss what I had sent him. Now, we were in San Antonio, Texas, so it was only a few hours' drive from there. He paid a far away in our room, you know, in a motel or whatever for the time. And he told me that my science was valid, but that it was far beyond anything that anyone was working with at the time, any scientists or anything. Now, that was then, you know. Now, my science would be interesting because people like Nassim Harriman and others, you know, they're talking about that kind of greater science. Not exactly maybe what I was writing about, but, you know, in that field of consciousness. But then that was just not being done. And yet he had the foresight to recognize it as valid. And he also had the most degrees of any science degrees of any astronaut in the program at that time. So he interviewed me on several occasions. We went back and forth to Houston. And then he told me, I remember he knelt in front of me. I was sitting in one chair, my mother in the other, and he knelt in front of me and said that I was the most exciting thing they had found, him and his little team, so far. However, he was dedicated to this institute, which would become the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And that in order to continue with me, it would have to be a lifetime work, just me, you know, focused on my work. He said it was that in-depth and difficult to connect to the current science. It would have to be created a whole new language for it, and, you know, on and on. And he said, so regrettably, he can no longer work with me. While that was disappointing to a degree, it gave me the impetus to know that this was genuine. And when I say genuine, I don't mean that I can never get anything wrong or misinterpret something. It has to go through my lens. I'm a translator. I don't like to call myself a channel. I don't really believe there are any such things as channels. They are translators. And unless you're a medium and then you're receiving directly, you know, like the words and everything right from the entity, it takes over your body or whatever. But channels are really translators. They have to come through their lens, and so they can make mistakes in translation. But I feel that mine does have a high degree of accuracy based on not only Edgar Mitchell's assessment, but others as well, such as George L. Lawrence, the inventor of the world's first laser engine, among many other things, who was very interested in my work. We communicated back and forth for years. There's a whole mystical story around that. And his colleague, Christopher Bird, who co-wrote the book The Secret Life of Plants with Peter Hopkins, I believe was his name, somebody Hopkins. And Dr. Bird was an associate of Einstein's, a young associate at the time. So, and I've had other indications that my work has been valid. But I look at it as objectively as I can. under the circumstances. So around this time, also, I began to have experiences at night with the shining ones, I'm going to call them rather than beings, appearing in my room. I would open my eyes, and there they were, and they communicated with me telepathically. They were human-like beings, and these individuals told me that they were ultra-terrestrials, and they were a team that was working with me specifically. I'm sure they did other things, but I was on their list. However, when they actually appeared to me like that, it scared me. You know, you wake up, and these were men, the ones that I was seeing. They're women later, and you know, 7 foot, because they're kind of tall, 6'5" to 7 foot man standing in your bedroom at night is a little scary, even if you know a minute, just a second or two later, that it's not a burglar or something. It's still, at the moment you see it, you know, it scares you. It scared me anyway, and I would scream. And of course, they would immediately leave. They communicated to me later. They communicated me more when they were not appearing than when they were, because they didn't have a lot of time to communicate with me then, since I screamed them away. But they told me that it actually hurt them, that loud screeching, because they were in a particularly altered state of I don't know exactly how they did that, you know, like beam me up, Scotty. I don't know exactly, but whatever it was, that loud sonic yell physically hurt them, and they had to leave quickly. So I was sorry for that, but I couldn't seem to help screaming at them. They even tried floating some balloons through my room, which went right through the wall, and I didn't scream at that, but they were trying to show me things that were totally harmless to me, and to see that they were actually on another level of experience, because the balloons went through the wall. Try to, you know, get me conditioned better for their appearance. Then one time they went to my mother, who was born the year the Wright brothers flew Kitty Hawk, 1904. She was old enough to be my grandmother, and I was her only child. And she didn't flinch, you know, she didn't scream or anything. And so my physician, Ramul, appeared to her and asked her to go into the room with him, to my room, so that I thought if I saw my mother coming in first and him following her, you know, it might not be such a scary thing for me. But it still scared me. So that I was a tough case to handle. And I was always embarrassed afterwards, of course. And they told me, hey, you don't want us to do this, we'll stop. But this is really important. And I said, no, I want you to come, but I'm just having trouble, you know, on this particular level with it. So they eventually did what they needed to do with me, which was help me heal on certain levels. I still have health problems, but I'm quite sure I would not have lived this long or this well if I had not had their assistance at that early age. In fact, there was two instances where they actually dramatically helped two children that I knew about in my life, and I asked them to assist. And there was no question that it was quite amazing. So they also told me during this time that I had a mentor. Actually, they called him my benefactor. I use the term mentor now. It's more understandable to people in the spiritual community. And that this mentor or benefactor was on a higher level, a higher frequency than they were. They called him an illuminary or illumined one. I'm not sure they actually, as I think about it, used that term. It was later that that term came about, but that's what he was. And they didn't give me a name or identification or anything, but they said they were preparing me for actually being able to communicate with him. He was always with me, but I couldn't communicate with him, or he with me at that stage. Not consciously, anyway. So about 10 years later, was in 1977 to be precise, I was able to receive communications from him and meet him. And the identity of that being was Thoth, the Thoth, who was the architect of the pyramids of Giza and much more. And he was also a Thoth previous to that. Thoth is a title, he told me. He was Thoth Muzurud in Atlantis, and then later, in the first stage of Atlantis, and then later he was reincarnated on the planet, but with star genetics. The first one came directly from the blue star Rigel. And the second incarnation was here on Earth, but still with a high level of star genetics. And that incarnation was Thoth Racemus of Afra. He was born in what was now Tibet. He came to Atlantis and then went into Egypt. He now resides in the inner earth, the sacred hollow of the earth, as Thoth Hara, which is also the name he uses for his new earth presentation, his new earth self. This is a whole other topic I'm not going to get into here. You can click on the tab Thoth Hara and you can understand it a little bit better if you read that on my website. Anyway, he began coming to me then, and I did not see him in full form once I saw his beautiful hand with a ring on it. And it wasn't scary at all. It was just sort of suspended in light, and he wanted me to see the ring for some reason. And the second time, I simply saw a emerald of light, and I knew it was him. Otherwise, I have not seen him except faintly in my mind's eye. And I hope one day to actually see him, like in what I call a third eye flash, which I've seen other beings in, including recently Osiris, but not Thoth. And I want to see him so badly. Anyway, in all these years, that has not happened. But he has certainly been communicating with me. And I have 55 plus years of work, that most of it from 1977 on, a little bit before from the ultra beings, but most of it comes directly from the Thothic stream, as I call it, and the Thothic entity, and the Thothic Akasha, which is his holographic sliver of the complete Akasha. It is complete, but it's complete through the field of his resonance. Again, all of this is explained more fully on the Thoth page in my website. So from there, I've been working with this entity and these energies all this time. I've not done anything else. It's been my life's work. I've not been out in the world and, worked here and there, or even had a lot of life experiences outside of that envelope. That doesn't mean that I haven't had my own personal challenges in life and inner work, but I mean, I haven't lived out in the world like most people have. At this point, I would like to interject something that I work with that I believe is integral to how I communicate my information to the world. The videos are paramount for me at this time. I mean, I've written for years and years and years, and I still write. But at this time, the videos are really my main way of communicating the work. And I also employ in the videos, interspersed with other things, images that I create in the virtual world of Second Life. I do this because they are now so realistic, and I can create things in there that show you, to a degree, what I'm seeing and what I know about. This is the area where I've also created an image of Thoth that I sort of in Braille feel him, feel his energy, feel his appearance. I can see him, as I said, in my mind's eye to a degree, but I fill in the blanks, so to speak. I almost want to say in Braille, because I can feel what he looks like. And I've spent many years developing this avatar, or what I am now calling a virtual affinity of Thoth. because I've been in Second Life since 2008, and I've been working on his avatar all that time. And of course, the technology in Second Life has advanced during that time. So now I feel I have created an image of him, while not exact, of course, is very close. You could pick him out in a lineup with that image. So I also, create other images of Mikala, of myself, in various types of divine feminine, of Osiris, but none of these images are as closely correct, I feel, as the one of Thoth. They have a similarity, but the Thoth one is very close at this time. At this time, I also have the Blue Star Rising video show, which is ongoing, usually about twice a month, which is hosted by my colleague Michael Henry Dunn. I'm also continuing with the personal sessions that I give individuals that I do charge for, $185 for an hour. And you can schedule them by looking at the bottom of any page. There's a scheduling link for that, and also a more info link. In addition, I do custom art, activational art for the individual. I can do logos for websites, etc., that are having to do with spiritual energies, and also book covers or art for books, again, with a spiritual topic. You can find more information on all this on my About Maia page. The articles and the videos, which are so numerous, are all free to read and watch. And I believe you can also download most of the videos, if you care to, for your own collections. I will be able to continue to do this if I'm supported financially, and that means contributions, sessions, custom art, whatever you feel you can put toward the continuation of this work on a much freer and accessible basis. Please, I hope you will visit my sustainment page on the Nessia website. Thank you so much for listening to my story.